Me at the company Gala as the Leech maid. Little did she know that I've been the majority shareholder since my late husband's first investment. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd hear those words from my own daughter-in-law's mouth. Not in a million years. My heart still aches when I remember that moment. "Oh, this is Eleanor, Daniel's mother," Vanessa said with that artificial laugh that always made my skin crawl. "Our little parasite." The conversation at the Core Tech 30th anniversary gala froze instantly. I stood there, my fingers tightening around my modest handbag. The navy blue dress I'd saved for special occasions suddenly feeling like it was suffocating me. The executives from the company where my son had worked for 8 years exchanged uncomfortable glances, their eyes flickering with embarrassment that wasn't for them to feel. "She's always hanging around our house," Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with undisguised contempt that cut through me like a knife. "Can't seem to manage on her own since Daniel's father passed away. Poor thing is completely lost without William." I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, the heat rising to my face as my stomach twisted into a tight knot. 5 years since William died, and this was how they saw me. A burden, a parasite. The worst part wasn't the stranger's pitying looks that seemed to pierce right through me. It was Daniel standing there saying nothing, just a weak smile frozen on his face while his wife tore apart my dignity. "I should find the lady's room," I murmured, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of judgment pressing down on my shoulders. As I walked away, Vanessa's tinkling laughter followed me like a shadow. She's always been this sensitive. We practically have to babysit her these days. It's like having another child. The bathroom was mercifully empty. I gripped the marble countertop until my knuckles turned white, staring at my reflection. A woman with silver hair and tired eyes. A woman they knew absolutely nothing about, though the pain in those eyes was unmistakable. If they only knew the truth. If Vanessa only knew that the company whose anniversary they were celebrating, Core Technologies, belonged more to me than anyone else in that room. I wasn't just a guest, I was the majority shareholder. I owned 51% of the company that paid for Vanessa's designer dresses and Daniel's luxury car. The company William and I had built from nothing, working endless nights while raising Daniel, mortgaging our tiny home for the initial investment, pouring our souls into every aspect of its creation. But I had promised William. On his deathbed, his hand clutching mine with surprising strength, he had made me swear. "Don't tell Daniel," he'd whispered, his voice already fading as I fought back tears. "Let him make his own way. Let him earn his position without living in our shadow. Promise me, Eleanor." I had kept that promise for 5 years, the weight of it growing heavier with each passing day. I'd attended board meetings quietly through a proxy, my heart pounding every time I saw my son's name on reports. I'd watched from a distance as the company grew, as my son climbed the corporate ladder on his own merit. I'd lived simply in my small home, never touching the millions that were rightfully mine. And I had welcomed Vanessa into our family, despite her obvious disdain for my modest lifestyle that seemed to offend her on a personal level. I splashed cold water on my face and straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar ache of keeping up appearances. When I returned to the gala, Vanessa was holding court with the executive team, Daniel at her side like an accessory. Her red designer dress probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. But I didn't care about material things. Never had. What hurt was seeing my son transformed into someone I barely recognized. "There she is!" Vanessa called out with artificial warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Eleanor, come tell everyone about your bridge club. So adorable how you keep busy with your little hobbies." I smiled politely, swallowing the bitter taste of condescension. It keeps my mind sharp. What Vanessa didn't know was that my bridge club was actually a monthly meeting with my financial advisor, reviewing the performance of Core Technologies and my other investments. The irony almost made me laugh despite the ache in my chest. Later that evening, as we were leaving, I overheard Vanessa whispering to Daniel, her manicured hand gripping his arm possessively. "We need to talk about your mother. She can't keep coming to these events. She's embarrassing, Daniel. People are going to think you come from, nothing." "She's my mother, Vanessa," Daniel said. But his voice lacked conviction, and each weak word felt like a betrayal that pierced my heart. "And she's holding you back." Pierce was watching when she spilled her drink. "You're up for that VP position, Daniel. We can't afford these mistakes if we want that house in Lakewood." My heart cracked as my son sighed. a sound of defeat that hurt more than any of Vanessa's insults. I'll talk to her. Maybe it's time to consider that retirement community we looked at. They didn't see me standing there, didn't notice me slipping away to call a taxi instead of riding with them. On the drive home, watching the city lights blur through my tears, I made a decision that sent a surprising surge of strength through me. For 5 years, I had honored William's wishes. I had stayed in the shadows, letting our son find his way. But William never could have imagined Vanessa. Never could have foreseen how she would poison Daniel against me. How she would make him ashamed of his own roots. Tomorrow, I would call Charles Morrison, the family attorney who managed my shares. It was time to rethink my approach, not out of vengeance, but out of love for my son, for William's legacy, and for my own dignity that I'd allowed to be trampled for too long. As I paid the taxi driver and walked up the path to my modest home, the same home where we'd raised Daniel, where William and I had dreamed of our future, I felt a strange calm settling over me like a protective blanket. Vanessa had no idea who she was dealing with. The parasite was about to show her teeth. The morning after the corporate gala, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at a photograph that brought both joy and pain. William and I on the day we opened the first Core Technologies office, a converted storage room with 2 desks and a dream that seemed almost foolish at the time. I was 26, William 30. Both of us exhausted but beaming with pride, our eyes bright with possibility. "We did it," he had whispered in my ear that day, his arms wrapping around me tightly. "This is just the beginning, Eleanor. Everything we've worked for is finally happening." Who would have thought that tiny operation would grow into the multi-million-dollar company it was today? A company my own son worked for, climbing the ranks, never knowing his parents had built it from nothing, never knowing the legacy that waited for him. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts with a jolt. Charles Morrison stood on my porch, his leather briefcase in hand. At 71, he was still sharp as a tack, his eyes missing nothing. The only person besides me who knew the full truth about my ownership of Core. "You sounded upset on the phone," he said as I led him to my well-ordered study. The walls lined with family photos and early company memorabilia that Daniel never noticed when he visited. I poured out everything, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. Vanessa's cruel words at the gala, the way they cut through me. Daniel's silence that hurt even more. Their plans to ship me off to a retirement community as if I were a problem to be solved. Charles listened quietly, his bushy eyebrows drawing together as anger flashed in his eyes. "It's been 5 years, Eleanor," he finally said, his voice gentle but firm. "Maybe it's time to tell Daniel the truth. William never intended for you to suffer like this." I shook my head, feeling the familiar tightness in my throat. William wanted him to succeed on his own merits. You know how important that was to him. And he has, Charles pointed out, leaning forward. He's earned his position. But William never intended for you to be disrespected this way. He loved you too much for that. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. The quarterly report on Core Technologies. "The company's thriving under your silent guidance. Your shares are worth more than triple what they were when William passed. You could buy 10 mansions bigger than whatever house Vanessa's showing off to her friends and still have millions left over." I took the report, my fingers trembling slightly as I flipped through pages of figures that represented William's and my life's work. Nearly 28 years of sacrifice, risk, and determination. A lifetime of dreams realized through sheer persistence. "Did I ever tell you about the beginning? Before Core was even an idea?" I asked softly, needing to remember. Charles settled back, giving me the time I needed, his eyes kind. "We were so young when we met," I began, the memories washing over me. "William was working as a software engineer for a small tech firm. I was a newly graduated accountant at the same company. We lived in that tiny apartment on Maple Street, the one with the leaky ceiling and temperamental heating." I smiled at the memory, feeling William's presence so strongly in that moment. William would bring coding problems home, work through them late into the night. I'd help him with the business planning, create financial projections. We saved every penny until we could afford to start our own company. Those early years had been lean but full of purpose and passion. William developing software through endless nights while I managed the accounts, handled clients, made cold calls to potential investors. Both of us terrified and exhilarated as we secured our first major contract, holding each other and crying with relief. When I got pregnant with Daniel, we were scared we'd lose everything, I continued, the memory still vivid and emotional. I worked right up until my water broke, determined not to let our dream fail. I was back analysing financial reports with Daniel in a bassinet beside my desk just 3 weeks later, learning to type with one hand while holding him with the other. Those memories were so clear, so precious, nursing Daniel between client calls, the sweet weight of him in my arms, William taking him for walks when I needed to focus, returning with our son asleep against his shoulder. Our baby growing up surrounded by the hum of computers and the vision of his parents building something meaningful together. Daniel saw all of that, I said, my voice catching, but he was too young to remember. By the time he was in high school, the business was successful enough that we could give him a more normal life. William wanted him to focus on being a teenager, not on the family business. We wanted him to find his own identity. When Daniel went to college, we made the decision not to tell him that his tuition was being paid by the company his parents had built. We sold our large home and moved into this smaller house, using the difference to make it appear that's how we were financing his education. We wanted him to find his own path. I explained to Charles, remembering William's passionate conviction about this, not feel obligated to join the family business or live in our shadow. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had found his way to Globocore anyway. Hired on his own merits, working his way up without ever knowing the full story of his heritage. Pride and sadness mingled in my heart at the thought. Then William got sick. Cancer. Fast and brutal. My voice broke, the pain still fresh even after 5 years. In the hospital right before the end, he made me promise. He made me swear not to tell Daniel about the shares. He gripped my hand so tightly and said our son needed to stand on his own feet, that the company would be his legacy. But Daniel's success needed to be his own. Charles reached over and patted my hand, his touch comforting. William was a good man, Eleanor. One of the best I've known. But he couldn't have foreseen this situation with Vanessa. He would never have wanted you to be treated this way. After William's death, I'd transferred most of his shares into my name, maintaining our controlling interest in the company that had been our life's work. A small portion went into a trust for Daniel that would mature when he turned 40, still 5 years away. As far as Daniel knew, his father had left him a modest inheritance, nothing more. Vanessa met Daniel 3 years ago, I said, the memory of their first meeting still clear in my mind. From the beginning, she made it clear she thought he could do better than his simple mother, always making pointed comments about my clothes, my house, suggesting I needed looking after as if I were incompetent. And Daniel allows this? Charles asked, his tone sharpening with disapproval. I sighed, feeling the familiar ache of disappointment. He's caught in the middle. Vanessa's ambitious and she's relentless. She sees him as her ticket to the life she wants, and she's convinced him it's what he wants too. A life you could provide with the snap of your fingers, Charles pointed out, tapping the financial report. One word from you and their entire relationship dynamic would change. I stared down at the photograph again. Young William and Eleanor, full of dreams that had actually come true beyond our wildest expectations. The cost had been high, but the achievement was real. I don't know what to do, Charles, I admitted, the conflict tearing at me. I've kept my promise. But at what cost? To Daniel, to myself, to the company William and I built together? Charles closed his briefcase with a decisive click. I think it's time we reviewed your options, Eleanor. Legally, the company is yours to control as you see fit. William trusted your judgment, and so do I. As we began discussing possibilities, I felt something stirring within me, a feeling I hadn't experienced since William's death. Not vengeance, but a quiet determination that warmed me from within. William had wanted to protect our son from entitlement, from the burden of legacy. He never intended for me to become a doormat, watching silently as everything we built together was threatened by those who didn't understand its value. It was time for some changes at Globocore Technologies, and time for me to reclaim my dignity. The following week, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Visit Globocore Technologies headquarters. Not as the majority shareholder whose signature could change the company's direction in an instant, but as Daniel's mother, bringing him lunch as I occasionally did before Vanessa came into our lives and deemed such gestures embarrassing. The gleaming glass and steel building downtown made my heart swell with pride and bittersweet memories. It was a far cry from our first tiny office. I signed in at reception, noticing how the young woman eyed my modest clothing with barely concealed judgment, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently as she called up to Daniel's office. I'm here to see Daniel Westbrook, I said, standing a little straighter. I'm his mother. She looked skeptical, as if someone like me couldn't possibly be related to an executive. Minutes later, Daniel appeared, surprise and unmistakable discomfort flashing across his face. My heart constricted at his reaction. "Mom, what are you doing here?" He glanced around nervously, his eyes darting to check if any important colleagues might witness this unexpected family reunion. "I brought your favorite," I said, holding up the bag containing his lunch, hoping to see a glimpse of my real son beneath the corporate facade. "Chicken salad on sourdough with the pickles on the side, just how you like it." His face softened slightly, a flash of the boy I raised appearing momentarily. "You didn't have to do that. I usually grab something at my desk." He led me to a small break room instead of his office, and the message was clear. He didn't want colleagues seeing his unfashionable mother in his workspace. The rejection stung more than I wanted to admit. As we sat, I noticed dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "You look exhausted, sweetheart. Are you getting enough sleep?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it made my heart ache with longing for William. Big project. The global expansion proposal is taking every spare minute. Vanessa's been stressed too. She's got her heart set on that house in Lakewood Estates, and we can't afford it unless I get this VP promotion. I knew Lakewood Estates, the exclusive enclave where multi-million-dollar homes house tech executives and old money families. Homes far above Daniel's current salary, even with Vanessa's income from her marketing director position. "That's quite ambitious," I said carefully, feeling his anxiety radiating across the table. Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Vanessa says it's the right neighborhood for someone on my career track. She's already talking to designers about the interior. Says we need to establish our brand, whatever that means." He smiled weakly. "You know, Vanessa, once she sets her mind on something, there's no changing it." I certainly did know, and the thought sent a chill through me. After lunch, I asked to use the restroom, using the opportunity to take a familiar detour. I wandered the halls of the company William and I had built from nothing, my fingers trailing along walls that might as well have our names written on them. I recognized a few old-timers who nodded politely, not knowing they were greeting one of the founders, the woman who signed their paychecks. The executive floor was quiet, most occupants at lunch. Then I heard it, a voice that made me freeze mid-step. Vanessa's voice drifted from a conference room, door slightly ajar. She wasn't supposed to be here today. Curious and suddenly uneasy, I paused. "Trust me, Jason, it's a perfect arrangement." Vanessa's tone was intimate in a way that made my stomach knot. "Daniel gets the promotion, you get the contract. And I make sure everyone's happy." A man's voice low, amused. "And how exactly do you plan to convince the board? They're notoriously conservative about global expansion plans. Pierce especially has been blocking every move. Daniel has a presentation next week. I've helped him prepare it, with some creative projections. Once he's VP of Global Marketing, he can push through your proposal easily. Trust me, they'll go for it. And what does your husband think about you meeting me like this, these private strategy sessions of ours?" Vanessa laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Daniel sees what I want him to see. He's so desperate for approval, for validation. It's almost too easy to guide him where I need him to go." I leaned against the wall, blood pounding in my ears, feeling physically ill. Was Vanessa having an affair? Or was this some kind of business manipulation? Either way, she was using my son, treating him like a pawn in her game. "There's still the matter of the unknown shareholder," the man Jason said. "No one seems to know who controls those shares since old man Westbrook died. That could be a problem for us. Daniel says his father left everything to some trust. The shares will come to him eventually. Until then, we work with what we have and position ourselves for the long term." Speaking of which, there was silence, then sounds that confirmed my worst suspicions. I hurried away, feeling sick to my stomach, anger and grief battling within me. Back home, I called Charles immediately. He arrived within the hour, bringing along Caroline Wright, the former CFO of Globacor, who had retired last year but still served as my proxy on the board, a fierce protector of the company's integrity. "Vanessa's involved with someone named Jason," I explained, pacing my study, unable to sit still with the emotions churning inside me. "They're plotting something involving a global expansion," and she mentioned Daniel's upcoming presentation to the board. It sounded like they're manipulating the numbers. Caroline's expression darkened. "That would be Jason Bennett. Smooth Operator runs a consulting firm specializing in global market expansion. He's been pushing the board to invest millions in risky ventures across Asia and Europe. We've been resistant until now. Charles added grimly. His track record is questionable at best, predatory at worst. They're using my son, I said, the realization burning like acid in my throat, manipulating him professionally and personally. There's more, I continued, explaining Vanessa's comment about the unknown shareholder and Daniel eventually inheriting. Charles and Caroline exchanged looks that sent a chill through me. Eleanor, Charles said gently, I think Vanessa is planning for the long term. If she believes Daniel will inherit controlling interest. She's positioning herself, Caroline finished, her business acumen cutting to the heart of it. Setting up influence and connections for when that happens. Creating a power base. My hands trembled, anger and fear mingling. And Daniel, where does he fit in her plans beyond being her access point? Neither answered, but their silence spoke volumes, confirming my worst fears. There's something else, I admitted, sinking into my chair. Last night, I overheard a phone conversation. Vanessa's been pressuring Daniel to have me move to Sunset Valley Retirement Community. She says I'm becoming difficult to manage and it would be better for everyone if I were in a more structured environment. Charles's bushy eyebrows shot up in alarm. That's a rather expensive facility. Premium care, but the costs are extraordinary. Yes, I said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. And apparently Daniel would need to sell my house to afford it. The house that is fully paid off. The house that, while modest, is worth considerable money in today's market. This is getting concerning. Eleanor, Caroline said, her voice sharp with worry. Vanessa appears to be systematically manipulating both Daniel's career and your living situation. The timing with this global expansion push can't be coincidental. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden William and I had planted together. Each flower and shrub a memory of our life together. I made a promise to my husband, I said quietly, but I don't think he would want this. He would never want Daniel used this way, or the company we built together put at risk. What do you want to do? Charles asked, and I heard the readiness in his voice to support whatever decision I made. I turned back to them, my mind clear for the first time in months. I want to protect my son and the company we built. Not by revealing everything right away. That might just drive Daniel further into Vanessa's influence if he feels manipulated. A more subtle approach. Then, Caroline suggested, her strategic mind already at work. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. I'm going to attend the board meeting next week. Not as Eleanor Westbrook, but as Ms. Wilson, the proxy shareholder. It's time I saw exactly what Vanessa and this Jason are planning, and what they've convinced my son to propose. And if Daniel recognizes you? Charles asked, concern in his eyes. I smiled grimly. Vanessa has made it very clear that no one expects to see Eleanor Westbrook in a boardroom. According to her, I'm just a confused old woman who needs constant supervision. Sometimes invisibility has its advantages. As Charles and Caroline left, making arrangements for the meeting, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Vanessa thought she was playing a clever game, using my son as a pawn in her ambitions. She had no idea she was playing against the woman who had built the board itself, who had weathered business challenges when Vanessa was still in grade school. The Leech was about to show her teeth, and they were sharper than anyone suspected. The day of the board meeting arrived with a pounding rainstorm that matched the turmoil in my heart. I stared at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. Gone was the simple Eleanor in practical clothes that Vanessa so often mocked. Caroline had taken me shopping for the occasion, insisting that Ms. Wilson, mysterious major shareholder, would dress the part and command respect. I wore a charcoal grey suit with subtle pinstripes that accentuated my still slim figure, a crisp white blouse that brightened my complexion, and low heels that still felt foreign on my feet after years of comfortable flats. My usually unstyled grey hair had been cut into a sleek bob and coloured a rich chestnut brown, close to my natural colour before age had stolen it. Caroline's stylist had shown me how to apply makeup that enhanced my features without being obvious, erasing years from my appearance. Perfect, Caroline said, appearing behind me in the mirror. Satisfaction in her eyes. You look like exactly what you are. A powerful businesswoman who owns 51% of a successful global tech company. William would be proud. I touched the delicate gold watch that had been William's gift on our 25th anniversary. The one extravagance I allowed myself. The familiar weight of it was comforting, a tangible connection to him. Caroline squeezed my shoulder, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He'd be proud, Eleanor. Not just of the company's success, but of you. You're protecting everything you built together. and your son's future. The Globacore Technologies boardroom was on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city we'd once viewed from our tiny first apartment. I entered behind Caroline, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. She had coached me thoroughly on how Ms. Wilson would behave. Confident, reserved, observant. Nothing like the confused old woman Vanessa described to her friends. Heads turned as we entered, curiosity and surprise evident on every face. I recognized most of the board members from the reports Charles provided, though I'd only met a few in person over the years. Daniel sat near the middle of the table, looking nervous, shuffling papers with shaking hands. At the far end sat Vanessa, who technically had no position at the company, but had apparently been invited for this special presentation. Beside her was a handsome man in his early 40s, Jason Bennett, I presumed. They were sitting too close, her manicured hand occasionally brushing his arm. "Ah, Caroline," said Edward Pierce, the board chairman who'd been with us since the early days. "And this must be Ms. Wilson," Caroline supplied smoothly, "here to observe today's proceedings given the significance of the proposed expansion." Murmurs circulated the room like an electric current. The mysterious shareholder had sent proxies to meetings for years, but had never appeared in person. I nodded politely but said nothing, taking a seat near the head of the table. The leather portfolio Caroline had provided held like a shield. Daniel was staring at me with a slight frown. His eyes narrowed in concentration. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart raced wildly in my chest. Would he recognize his own mother beneath the tailored suit and new hairstyle? After a moment, his gaze moved on, and I felt both relieved and strangely hurt that my own son didn't recognize me. Vanessa leaned over to whisper something to Jason, both looking suspiciously in my direction. I opened the leather portfolio, pretending to be absorbed in the meeting agenda, while acutely aware of every whisper, every glance. The meeting proceeded with routine business first. I spoke only when necessary, keeping my comments brief and direct, as Caroline had advised, my voice pitched slightly lower than normal. Daniel kept glancing at me, that puzzled look returning. Vanessa was less subtle, openly studying me with narrowed eyes like a predator assessing a potential threat. Finally, Edward announced, "Next item, presentation on the proposed global market expansion by Daniel Westbrook." Daniel stood, straightened his tie nervously, and moved to the front of the room. As he began his presentation, my heart swelled with conflicting emotions. I could see William in him, in the way he stood, in his gestures. The same earnest intelligence, the careful way he explained complex concepts. But I also saw something William never had, an undercurrent of desperation, a need to impress at all costs that made my heart ache. His proposal involved opening offices in Singapore, Shanghai, and Berlin, with a significant investment in speculative software development tailored to Asian and European markets. The numbers he projected were ambitious, bordering on fantasy, and I could see Vanessa's influence in every inflated projection. "As you can see," Daniel concluded, a slight tremor in his voice betraying his nerves, "our projected return on investment would be 27% within 18 months, with potential for exponential growth thereafter." I glanced around the table, reading the room as I'd done in countless business meetings over the decades. Most board members looked skeptical, exchanging concerned glances. Jason Bennett, however, was nodding enthusiastically, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Very impressive, Daniel," Jason said, his voice smooth as oil. "If I may add, my consultancy has extensive connections in all these markets. We could facilitate immediate entry points, significantly reducing typical startup costs and accelerating revenue generation." Vanessa beamed at Daniel with manufactured pride that didn't reach her eyes. I felt physically ill watching her performance, knowing she was setting my son up for a spectacular failure. Edward looked unconvinced, his years of business experience showing in his furrowed brow. "The investment required is substantial, and these projections seem conservative, actually," Jason interjected smoothly. "My team has compiled extensive market research that supports even more aggressive growth scenarios." I'd heard enough. I cleared my throat softly and the room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. The moment had arrived, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Mr. Westbrook," I said, addressing my own son formally, the words feeling foreign on my tongue, "your enthusiasm is commendable. However, I see several fundamental flaws in your proposal that concern me deeply." I proceeded to ask pointed questions about his market analysis, risk assessment, and contingency planning, drawing on my decades of business experience and intimate knowledge of the company. With each question, Daniel's confidence visibly deflated, confusion and embarrassment washing over his face. Vanessa's expression turned from confusion to anger as I systematically dismantled the proposal. "Who exactly are you to question this proposal?" she finally interrupted, unable to contain herself. "Daniel has worked extremely hard on this presentation. The company needs fresh thinking, not conservative roadblocks." "Vanessa," Daniel muttered, embarrassed by her outburst, his cheeks flushing. "No, Danielle," she snapped, her mask of sophistication slipping. "Some mysterious shareholder who never bothers to show up suddenly appears and starts undermining you. That's not right. We need to know who she is and what her agenda is." I met her gaze steadily, feeling strangely calm in the face of her hostility. "Mrs. Westbrook, I'm simply doing due diligence as a major investor in this company. Your husband's proposal risks millions of dollars on projections that appear to have been influenced by outside interests with questionable track records." I glanced meaningfully at Jason, who shifted uncomfortably under my scrutiny. Edward and other board members were watching the exchange with growing interest. The dynamics of the room shifting perceptibly. "I move that we table this proposal pending further review," I said calmly. "And I suggest we investigate Mr. Bennett's relationship with Globacor Technologies more thoroughly before proceeding with any partnership, particularly his past ventures and their outcomes." The vote was quick and decisive. Daniel's proposal was tabled. As the meeting adjourned, Vanessa stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the polished floor, Jason following close behind. Daniel lingered, looking defeated, his shoulders slumped in a way that made my heart ache. I approached him, conflicted emotions swirling within me. Part of me wanted to comfort him as his mother, to pull him into my arms as I had when he was a child. Instead, I spoke as Ms. Wilson, maintaining the necessary distance. "Mr. Westbrook, your basic concept has merit. The execution needs work, and the financial projections require significant revision. I'd be willing to discuss improvements if you're interested in a more sustainable approach." He looked up, surprised by the unexpected lifeline. "Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I'd appreciate that very much." As I turned to leave, he added, "Have we met before? You seem strangely familiar. Something about your eyes." My heart skipped painfully. "Perhaps in passing. I knew your father, William Westbrook. He was an exceptional businessman with integrity." His eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, Caroline appeared at my elbow, smoothly easing me toward the door, sensing my emotional state. In the elevator, I finally exhaled, my hands trembling with delayed reaction. That was harder than I expected, seeing him so manipulated, so lost. "You did well," Caroline assured me. "The board was impressed with your analysis. And you've bought time to address the real problem." "Vanessa," I said, anger flaring, "and this Jason person. They're using my son for their own ends, and they nearly damaged the company in the process. What will you do now?" Caroline asked as we reached the lobby, her eyes concerned. I stared at my unfamiliar reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. The decision I'd been wrestling with for days suddenly crystal clear. "It's time to tell Daniel the truth," I said quietly. "Not everything at once, that might be too overwhelming, but enough so he understands what's really happening and who's really manipulating him." Caroline nodded, squeezing my arm supportively. "I'll invite him to dinner tomorrow. Alone. It's time he knew at least part of his heritage." As we stepped outside into the rain, I felt both terrified and resolute. 5 years of honoring William's wishes, of staying silent while Vanessa gradually isolated my son from me. Tomorrow would change everything for better or worse. What I didn't know then was that Vanessa had already set a different plan in motion, one that would force my hand sooner than I expected and test my resolve to its limits. I barely slept that night, rehearsing what I would say to Daniel when he came for dinner. By morning, dark clouds had gathered both outside my window and inside my mind, matching my turbulent emotions. I was making coffee when my phone rang. "Charles." "Eleanor, we have a situation," he said without preamble, his voice tense. "Vanessa's made a move. She's convinced Daniel to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." My hand froze on the coffee pot, fear gripping me. "What? On what grounds?" "They're proposing a restructuring of the executive team. If it passes, several board members loyal to you would be removed, including Caroline." His voice tightened. "And there's more. She's somehow gotten wind that Ms. Wilson is connected to you." My contacts tell me she's been making calls, asking questions. How is that possible? I asked, my mind racing through possibilities, my heart pounding. I don't know, but Daniel called Caroline this morning asking direct questions about your involvement. He sounded agitated, confused. Vanessa must have been digging. I set the coffee pot down with a shaking hand, spilling hot liquid across the counter. I was going to tell him everything tonight on my terms. You may not have that luxury, Charles cautioned, his voice grave. Eleanor, if Vanessa has convinced Daniel you've been deceiving him all these years. The doorbell rang, interrupting him. Someone's here. I'll call you back. I hung up, my stomach in knots. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel standing on my porch, his expression stormy, rain dripping from his coat. I took a deep breath to steady myself and opened the door. Daniel, I wasn't expecting you until dinner. Were you ever going to tell me? He demanded, pushing past me into the hallway, rage and hurt radiating from him in waves. Or was the plan to keep lying to me forever? I closed the door, my heart hammering so hard it physically hurt. Daniel, please let me explain. It's not what you think. Explain what? That you're actually Ms. Wilson? That you've owned the company all this time? That my entire career has been? He ran his hands through his hair in agitation, a gesture so like his father's it made my throat tighten. What, Mother? A joke, some kind of test? Have you been laughing at me all these years? No, I said firmly, fighting to keep my voice steady. Never that. Please sit down. Let me tell you everything. The whole story. Not whatever version Vanessa has given you. Reluctantly, he followed me to the living room, but remained standing, arms crossed defensively over his chest, his face flushed with anger. How did you find out? I asked gently, needing to know what I was dealing with. Vanessa, he said, his voice bitter. She hired a private investigator after the board meeting. She thought there was something strange about this Wilson person who appeared out of nowhere and tanked my proposal. I closed my eyes briefly, pain washing over me. Of course she had. I should have anticipated her reaction. Is it true? Daniel demanded, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. Do you control Globocore Technologies? Has this all been some kind of game to you? I looked my son in the eyes, seeing the hurt child beneath the angry man. Yes, I control the company. Your father and I founded Globocore together before you were born. When he died, I inherited his shares. I own 51% of Globocore, but it was never ever a game. We were trying to protect you. Daniel stared at me as if seeing a stranger, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. All these years you've been living here in this modest house, driving that old car, accepting my help with groceries sometimes while you were worth millions. You let me believe we came from nothing. I nodded, feeling the weight of years of deception. Yes. Why? The word came out like an accusation filled with hurt. Why would you hide this from me? Why would you let me work there not knowing? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? How this makes me look to the board, to my colleagues? To Vanessa? It was your father's wish, I said, my voice catching on the words. His dying wish, Daniel. He wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because you were the owner's son. He believed it would make you stronger, more independent, more your own man. And you? Daniel's voice cracked slightly, vulnerability breaking through his anger. What did you want? The question pierced my heart, tears threatening to spill. I wanted to honor your father's dying wish. But I also wanted to protect you, to let you find your own path without the burden of our legacy. Daniel scoffed, but the sound held more pain than derision. Protect me from what? Success? Wealth? Knowing my own heritage, my birthright? From never knowing if you'd earned your position, I explained, willing him to understand the complexity of our decision. From the doubt that would have followed you if everyone knew you were the boss's son. From being given things rather than earning them. Your father came from nothing, Daniel. He built his success from the ground up. He wanted the same satisfaction for you. He was silent for a long moment, processing, his eyes moving to the family photos on the wall, seeing them with new understanding. And the board meeting yesterday, what was that about? Some kind of test? I chose my words carefully, aware how delicate this moment was. I had genuine concerns about the proposal. The projections seemed unrealistic, and I was worried about the involvement of Jason Bennett. His track record is concerning. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. What about Jason? This was the delicate part. How much to reveal about Vanessa without pushing Daniel further away or making him defensive. I have reason to believe his involvement may not be in the best interests of the company. The 3 previous companies that followed his global expansion plans suffered significant losses. One filed for bankruptcy. Vanessa says he's brilliant. Daniel's defensive tone told me everything about his state of mind, about how thoroughly she had influenced him. She says the board is too conservative, afraid of innovation and growth. Daniel, I said gently, have you looked into Jason's background yourself? His track record with other companies? The actual outcomes of his strategies, not just what he claims? Uncertainty flickered across his face, doubt creeping in. Vanessa did the research. She has contacts in the industry. I think you should do your own research, I suggested, trying to balance guidance with respect for his intelligence. Before tomorrow's board meeting, look at the actual numbers, not just the projections. His jaw tightened defensively. You know about that meeting too. What else are you monitoring in my life? Yes, I admitted. And I need you to understand something important, Daniel. The restructuring Vanessa is proposing would remove the very people who helped your father build this company. People who have protected its integrity for decades. People who knew him, who shared his vision. Vanessa says they're blocking progress, he countered. But I could hear less conviction in his voice, the first cracks appearing in his certainty. I moved to my desk and pulled out a folder. The one Charles had prepared months ago when we first noticed Jason Bennett circling the company like a shark sensing blood. This contains information about Bennett's previous ventures. 3 companies that invested in his global expansion plans. All 3 suffered significant losses. One filed for bankruptcy. The data, the projections, all remarkably similar to what he's proposing for Globacor. Daniel hesitated, then took the folder, conflict evident on his face. Why should I believe anything you say now? You've been lying to me for years. The accusation stung, but I understood his pain, his sense of betrayal. I haven't been completely honest about my role at Globacor. That's true. But I have never lied about loving you or wanting what's best for you. Everything your father and I did was to give you the freedom to become your own man. He looked away, blinking rapidly, fighting emotion. Daniel, I said softly, think about how quickly Vanessa found this information about me. Less than 24 hours after the meeting. She must have already been investigating. Already suspicious. Why would she be so interested in Ms. Wilson unless she saw a threat to her plans? She was protecting me, he insisted. But doubt had crept into his voice, his certainty wavering. Was she? I asked gently. Or was she protecting her own interests? Think about it, Daniel. Think about her reaction to the house you currently have versus the one she wants. Think about how she talks about your colleagues, your friends, about me. He stood abruptly, emotions warring on his face. I need time to think, to process all this. Everything I thought I knew about our family, about my career, it's all different now. Of course, I said, rising too, wanting to reach for him but holding back. But Daniel, please, before tomorrow's meeting, look at that folder. Look at the real numbers, not just what Vanessa and Jason are telling you. Ask yourself why they're pushing so hard for this restructuring right now. At the door, he paused, his hand on the knob. All those board meetings over the years. You were there, weren't you? Watching me. Judging me. I shook my head. Not judging, Daniel. Never that. I was proud of you. So proud of how you were succeeding on your own merits, just as your father wanted. I was staying connected to what your father and I built, and to you in the only way I could without breaking my promise. Something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in his armor of anger. A glimmer of understanding. The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow, he said, his voice tight. I suppose you'll be there. I will, I confirmed, straightening my shoulders. As myself this time. No more proxies, no more Miss Wilson. It's time for Eleanor Westbrook to take her place at the table. After he left, I called Charles and Caroline, updating them on the confrontation. We spent hours strategizing, calling loyal board members, preparing for every possible scenario Vanessa might unleash in the morning. By evening, I was exhausted but resolved. Tomorrow would decide everything, not just the future of Globacor Technologies, but my relationship with my son. The thought terrified me, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single photo that made my blood run cold. Daniel and Vanessa having dinner with Jason Bennett. All 3 looking grim and determined, documents spread on the table between them. Beneath the photo was a message they're planning something bigger than a restructuring. Be prepared. They're after full control. I stared at the screen, wondering who my mysterious ally was. Then I recognized the restaurant in the background and the waitress partially visible at the edge of the frame. It was Diane, William's niece, who had waited tables at that restaurant for years. She had recognized Daniel and Vanessa, and clearly found their conversation concerning enough to warn me. I sent back a simple thank you and set my phone aside. A plan forming in my mind. If Vanessa wanted to play hardball, she'd find I was more than capable of stepping up to the plate. Tomorrow, Eleanor Westbrook would finally take her rightful place at the head of the table, and no amount of manipulation would stand in my way. The Globacor Technologies boardroom fell silent as I walked in, the sudden hush like a physical force. No disguise today, no Ms. Wilson persona. Just Eleanor Westbrook in a simple but elegant navy suit that spoke of quiet authority. My silver hair neatly styled, William's gold watch gleaming on my wrist as a reminder of our shared vision. Board members who had known me for years, but only as Daniel's mother or as Caroline's mysterious client stared in confusion, whispers erupting around the table. Vanessa, seated beside Daniel near the head of the table, looked like she'd been slapped, her perfectly composed face slackening in shock. Jason Bennett, on Daniel's other side, leaned over to whisper something in his ear, his eyes narrowing with calculation. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa hissed loudly enough for everyone to hear, contempt barely masked by a thin veneer of concern. "This is a closed board meeting. Security should be called." Edward Pierce, the chairman, looked equally confused but more restrained. "Mrs. Westbrook, I'm afraid this is a private meeting of the It's Quite All Right, Edward," I said calmly, placing my leather portfolio on the table with deliberate precision. "I believe you'll find I have every right to be here. More right than some others present." Charles Morrison entered behind me, carrying his briefcase, his imposing presence adding weight to my entrance. "Mrs. Westbrook is here in her capacity as majority shareholder of Globacor Technologies," he announced, his authoritative voice filling the room. "She holds 51% of the company's shares and has since the death of her husband, William Westbrook, co-founder and former CEO. A collective gasp rippled through the room like a wave. All eyes turned to Daniel, who sat rigid, his expression unreadable, though I caught the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his pen. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa sputtered, her composure cracking. "Daniel's father owned the company. The shares are in a trust until Daniel turns 40, I finished for her, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Yes, a small portion are, but the controlling interest passed to me upon William's death, as was always intended." Edward looked bewildered, struggling to process this revelation. "But Ms. Wright has been voting those shares for years as my proxy," I confirmed, nodding to Caroline, who sat quietly at the far end of the table. "And as Ms. Wilson when necessary for privacy reasons that have now become obvious." Another shockwave visibly passed through the room. Jason Bennett's smooth composure finally cracked, worry flashing across his face as he quickly calculated what this meant for his plans. "Mrs. Westbrook has documentation confirming all of this," Charles added, pulling papers from his briefcase with practiced efficiency, "which I'll happily provide to each board member. But perhaps we should address the purpose of today's emergency meeting first. As I understand, time is of the essence." I took a seat directly across from Daniel, our eyes meeting briefly before he looked away. The hurt was still there, raw and fresh, but something else too. Uncertainty, confusion, and perhaps a glimmer of relief. The weight of pretense had been crushing him too, though he didn't fully realize it yet. "Yes, let's proceed," Edward agreed, gathering himself with the professionalism of a veteran executive. "Daniel, you called this meeting to propose restructuring the executive team." Daniel cleared his throat, visibly struggling with the moment. "Actually, in light of recent information, I'd like to propose a different agenda." Vanessa whipped her head around to stare at him, alarm replacing her usual poise. "Daniel, we discussed this. Stick to the plan." Her voice carried a warning that made my maternal instincts flare protectively. A tense silence followed, the atmosphere electric with unspoken conflict. Daniel looked down at the folder in front of him, the one I'd given him the day before, containing all the evidence about Jason Bennett's failed ventures and questionable business practices. "I spent last night doing additional research," Daniel said slowly, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "About our company's history, about Jason Bennett's business record, and about the global expansion proposal." He looked up, his gaze moving deliberately from Vanessa to Jason to me. "I found some troubling inconsistencies that I believe the board needs to be aware of." "Daniel," Vanessa warned, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This isn't what we prepared." He ignored her, straightening his shoulders in a gesture that reminded me powerfully of William. Mr. Bennett has been involved with 3 companies that attempted similar expansions into global markets. All 3 suffered significant losses within 2 years. 1 filed for bankruptcy. 2 are involved in ongoing litigation with shareholders. Jason's smile turned cold, predatory. Markets involve risk, Daniel. Your father understood that. Innovation requires courage. My father, Daniel repeated, emphasis on the word that seemed to take on new meaning for him overnight, built this company with careful growth strategies and ethical business practices. He never gambled with his employees' livelihoods or the company's future for short-term gains. I felt a surge of pride washing over me. Unexpected tears threatening as I heard Daniel defend William's principles. Principles he had absorbed through observation even without knowing the full story of his heritage. Furthermore, Daniel continued, his voice stronger now, I discovered that the projections in my proposal were based on manipulated data. He turned to Vanessa, hurt and betrayal evident in his eyes. Data you helped prepare knowing it was fundamentally flawed. Vanessa's face flushed with anger, her mask of sophistication slipping further. You're being ridiculous, Daniel. I was helping you advance your career, helping us secure our future. Were you? Daniel challenged, standing his ground in a way I'd never seen before. Or were you helping Jason secure a multi-million-dollar consulting contract that would benefit you both in ways you haven't disclosed to me? Jason stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to these unfounded accusations. My reputation in the industry. Actually, you do, I interjected, meeting his gaze with calm authority. Because the board should also know about your previous relationship with global tech partners. The company you recommended as our manufacturing partner in Asia. I nodded to Charles, who distributed more documents with efficient precision. A company where you were previously a silent partner and still receive substantial consulting fees. A clear conflict of interest you failed to disclose. The board members murmured as they reviewed the evidence, expressions of concern and anger spreading around the table as the full picture emerged. This is a witch hunt, Jason snapped, but his confident facade was crumbling rapidly. Daniel stood slowly, a new authority in his bearing that made my heart swell with pride despite the circumstances. No, it's due diligence. Something I should have done thoroughly before bringing this proposal forward. I allowed myself to be influenced by personal interests rather than the company's well-being. He faced the board directly. I withdraw my proposal for global expansion and recommend we sever all ties with Bennett Consulting effective immediately. Daniel. Vanessa grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging visibly into his sleeve. You're ruining everything we've worked for. He pulled away from her, a decision evident in his face that seemed to transform him before my eyes. No, Vanessa. I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake that could damage the company my parents built. He turned to face her fully. Just like I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake about my mother and her place in our lives. Vanessa's expression turned venomous, her true nature fully exposed. Your pathetic mother has been lying to you for years. She's been controlling your career, manipulating everything from the shadows like some puppet master while pretending to be a helpless old woman. My mother, Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying more power for its restraint, has been honoring my father's wishes while protecting the company they built together. He looked at me then, his eyes softening with the beginning of understanding. Something I'm only beginning to comprehend the value of. Edward cleared his throat, taking control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. In light of these revelations, I believe we should adjourn to consider next steps. This is clearly a significant moment for Globacor that requires careful consideration by all parties. As the board members filed out, some stopping to speak with me in hushed, respectful tones, Vanessa remained seated, her face a mask of fury and calculation. You've ruined everything, she hissed at me when we were nearly alone, venom in every syllable. We had it all planned. The promotion, the house in Lakewood, everything was falling into place. You had it planned, Daniel corrected her, a new strength in his voice that I'd never heard before. Using me as your stepping stone. Using my family's company for your own advancement. Don't be naive, Daniel, she snapped, gathering her designer handbag. Everyone uses everyone. Your precious mother used you too. Keeping you in the dark while she controlled everything from behind the scenes. There's a difference, he replied, his voice steady. She did it out of love. You did it out of greed. I see that clearly now. Vanessa stood, her expression cold and calculating. This isn't over, she threatened, glaring at both of us. You'll regret this, Daniel. Both of you will. She stormed out, heels clicking aggressively, Jason trailing behind her like a shadow. Finally, Daniel and I were alone in the boardroom, the silence between us heavy with unspoken emotions. I'm still angry with you, he said after a long moment, his voice softer but still laced with hurt. You should have told me the truth years ago. I had a right to know. I know, I admitted, my heart aching with regret. Keeping your father's promise became a habit, then a shield. I was afraid if I told you I'd lose you, that you'd resent us for keeping you in the dark, or feel that your achievements weren't your own. Instead, you almost lost me to Vanessa's manipulations, he said, the pain in his voice unmistakable. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so like his father's. When did you know about her and Jason? Was it obvious to everyone but me? I suspected at the company gala, I said gently, when I saw how she interacted with him. Then I confirmed it when I overheard them at the office. It wasn't obvious, Daniel. She was very careful around you. He nodded slowly, processing. Last night, after I left your house, I called some former colleagues who had worked with Jason. Everything you said was true. His voice caught slightly. And then I started wondering what else you were right about. Vanessa? I asked carefully, not wanting to push. I checked her phone while she was in the shower, he admitted, shame and anger mixing in his expression. The texts between her and Jason. They've been planning this for months, strategizing how to use me to gain control of what they thought would eventually be my shares. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears that broke my heart. Was I that blind, Mom? Did I let her fool me so completely? The word Mom, so simple, so powerful after the formality of recent interactions, broke something open inside me. Hope rushing in where there had been only fear. We see what we want to see in the people we love, I said softly, remembering my own grief and denial during William's illness. I've made my own mistakes, trusted the wrong people. We all have. Daniel came around the table and took the seat beside me, closer than he'd been in months. What happens now, with the company? With us? The question held vulnerability I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy. I reached for his hand, half expecting him to pull away, relief washing through me when he didn't. That's up to you. Your father wanted you to make your own way, and you have. You're a good businessman. Daniel, with or without the Westbrook name behind you. You've proven that. And Vanessa? He looked down at our joined hands. I squeezed his hand gently. Also your decision. But speaking as both your mother and the majority shareholder of this company, I'd recommend some serious reconsideration of that relationship before it does more damage to both your personal and professional life. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first I'd seen all day. Already ahead of you. I packed a bag this morning. Some things are suddenly very clear to me. 2 months later, I sat in the same boardroom, warmth spreading through me as I watched Daniel presented a new proposal, a carefully researched plan for expanding our educational software division. His confidence was different now, grounded in genuine knowledge rather than desperate striving for approval. Vanessa was gone from his life, though the divorce proceedings were just beginning and promised to be contentious. Jason Bennett had disappeared from our corporate radar, moving on to other potential marks after being thoroughly exposed. Daniel had moved into the guest house on my property temporarily, he said, though we both knew he was healing from more than just a failed marriage. He was reconnecting with his roots, with the legacy his father and I had built, learning about the company's history from the beginning. And so, Daniel concluded his presentation with a quiet confidence that reminded me so much of William. I believe this expansion stays true to Globacor's core values while positioning us for sustainable growth. It honors our past while embracing our future. Thank you, Daniel, I said from my place at the head of the table, a position I had finally publicly claimed after decades in the shadows. The board will vote now. The proposal passed unanimously, and the pride I felt was almost overwhelming. As the meeting adjourned, Edward approached me with genuine respect in his eyes. Eleanor, I've been meaning to tell you. William would be proud of how you've handled everything. The company, the situation with Daniel, all of it. I smiled, touching the watch on my wrist. The physical connection to the man I still missed every day. I think he would be prouder of Daniel for finding his own way through adversity, just as William always wanted. Later that evening, Daniel and I sat on the back porch of my home. Our home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Much as William and I had done for so many years. The garden we'd planted together was in full bloom, a legacy of beauty that had outlasted hardship. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, turning his coffee mug in his hands, "I've been thinking about the company name." "Oh?" I took a sip of my tea, curious. "Everyone associates Globacor with Dad, with the Westbrook name, but you were always there too, an equal partner in everything. Maybe it's time for a small change." Nothing dramatic, just acknowledging the full story. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, my heart warming at his thoughtfulness. "Westbrook and Wilson Technologies," he suggested, looking at me with genuine respect, honoring both legacies, both founders. "The company was never just Dad's vision, it was yours too." I felt tears prick my eyes, emotion overwhelming me. "Your father would like that. He always said I was the foundation that made everything else possible." "And the mysterious Ms. Wilson?" Daniel asked with a small smile that reminded me of the boy he'd been. "Will she make any more appearances at board meetings?" I laughed softly, the sound lighter than it had been in years. "I don't think so. Eleanor Westbrook is finally ready to step into the light and claim her place. No more shadows, no more secrets." As the last rays of sun gilded the garden William and I had planted, I felt a sense of peace settling over me like a warm embrace. Vanessa had called me a parasite, never knowing that I was actually the foundation of everything she had coveted. Now the truth was out, and with it came not the revenge I might have sought, but something far more valuable: redemption, reconnection, and the chance to finally honor both William's legacy and my own while building a new relationship with our son based on truth and mutual respect. Sometimes, I reflected, my heart full as Daniel smiled at me across the porch, the greatest power comes not from hiding in the shadows, but from finally stepping forward to claim your rightful place in the sun.